Hi, here we are for our next Supper Club video. We hear that the Supper Clubs are going great, and so we're happy to be back with you again. Hope you had a good Christmas, and if you think back to where we were before Christmas, we talked a little bit about God and our understandings of God and how we think about God. So this time we thought we would talk about Jesus. Jesus has been known as everything from a radical revolutionary to the Good Shepherd. The pictures we see, the childhood pictures we see of Jesus with the lamb or the surrounded by children, sort of the Good Shepherd. And so we thought we would try to take you down the path of this broad sort of picture of Jesus and then invite you to think about it for yourselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways that Jesus has been portrayed, and one of the ways that he gets talked about a lot these days is not so much in those different categories of shepherd versus revolutionary, but well, what I've heard is pre-Easter versus post-Easter. It's really about Jesus, the historical figure, versus a kind of living Christ that we encounter in a spiritual way now. And there's a lot of at least in theological circles and around seminary, Are you more interested and more focused on the historical Jesus? And so then you're talking more about a teacher, more about a moral figure, the things he did. And certainly we talk a lot about that. That's powerful for me here at the church, and a lot of the sermons that we'll give, we talk about the things he did. But equally important, and I think a lot of us want to say it's not an either or, but it's a both and. Equally important is a post-Easter Jesus, someone whose spirit is still very much with us. I've always taken that sense of that Bill shared once about when I go into a hospital, that I can trust that Jesus walks before me. And that's a very kind of mystical. I can't put bones on that, but it's been powerful for me as an image. So there's a reality to that, a lived presence that I think we probably both feel and want to hold on to both of those ideas.
Right. For me, if I think about Jesus, there's sort of three, instead of the two ways you've talked about, there's three sort of distinctive ways in my head and in my heart and journey, my own spiritual journey, that I think about Jesus. One is, as you said, the historical Jesus. Who was this man, this Jewish man who lived at a particular time, and what decisions did he make in his life, and how did he live his life in a way that somehow 2,000 years later still impacts my life. So it's really a fascination with this historical person who has made such a huge impact on the world and on so many people. The second part is what you would say the risen Christ, or the present living Christ, and I think of that often as the Spirit of Jesus, the same way Greg does, that it's that presence that is with me, something that's really beyond space and time, that is very mystical and different, that I feel accompanied by, that Spirit of Jesus. And the third for me is the understanding of who Jesus has been to the church. We could call it the creedal Jesus, or and it's how have theologians over the years written about Jesus. How do we understand Jesus as a part of the Trinity, the part of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, or the Creator, Son, and Spirit? Where does Jesus fit in that relationship through the history? And in our creeds, it changes. You can read a creed from an ancient creed. Jesus is portrayed and seen differently than Jesus would be today, and that's interesting for us to think about.
Yeah. Just something that we hadn't talked about before, but it reminds me of a way in which Jesus gets talked about is as the revelation of God, is the enfleshment of God. That there's something uniquely powerful about moving from this concept of God. I mean, I think we can all kind of say, okay, well, I can understand God's Spirit with me, but to have a historical figure that enfleshed that Spirit, that lived it, is what's so compelling to me about our faith. I mean, I've been read things in other faith traditions, but they often will lack that tangible quality of in having Jesus be this figure that I know who he is. He's a human being who struggled, who cried, who laughed, went to weddings, he had a life, and that's a very powerful image for me.
And there may be other images of Jesus that you have encountered, and what we want you to think about and maybe talk about with each other is what are those images of Jesus?
Yeah.
There's another big question though that we want to address before we move to there.
Yeah, well, I mean, for all of us living in a pluralistic world, the question of how do we understand Jesus, given that 75% of the world does not follow Jesus and understands the world differently, and we'll often hear people say, "Well, Jesus is the only way," or "You've got to."
If you sign up to be a Christian, it means you're signing up to say that Jesus is the only way.
Everyone else is wrong, and maybe going to hell. And I mean, it can be quite divisive then. And I think most of us who want to live in a world where we welcome other faith traditions too. They're not ours, but they're still welcome. How do we live in that world? And so for me, at least, I've often said to folks that, I don't know the mind of God. I don't know that Jesus is the only way or not. It's a bit too arrogant in some ways. What I do know is that Jesus is my way. I have found a path to God through this person Jesus. I can, I'll put my life out for that. Beyond that, who am I to say? And that for me gives enough space for other faith traditions to be what they claim to be and need to be, and we don't need to settle that question.
Yeah, the reality of our world is that there is truth present in many places in our world, and I think most of us would agree to that for any one thing in our physical world or in our lives to contain all of the truth just does not seem, doesn't make sense on a very deep level. And yet we have a faith commitment to a particular way, because it's very hard to be a religious person without having some sort of concrete, practical way. So this is the cutting edge of the church right now, is now that we know we live in a pluralistic society, a world, and we know that we're a part of a global community, how is it that our way, we still can practice our way, hold to the truth that we understand, and leave that space for other truths? So,
and I want to pick up what you said, the particularity, that there's I have a lot of friends who would say, well, I think Jesus is fine, and I think Buddha's fine, and I kind of pick and choose, and I'll read this book and that book. Right. And I think there's certainly wisdom in different faith traditions. I do think we're built in a way that we live in a particular world in a particular time, and particularity is important. You've got to choose a path and go with it, regardless of what that is, and probably have plenty of wisdom in any of those traditions. The one that we're in is. It's a
little similar to your family commitment. You can't just be married. You have to be married to someone. You can't just be in a relationship. You have to have a relationship with someone. So a little bit like that. So lots to talk about. We want to leave you with the question of, how do you see Jesus?
And really getting back to some of the things we've brought up, you might talk about whether you think of Jesus as really this kind of cutting-edge revolutionary who was turning the tables on the status quo, versus the shepherd and the comforter. And of course it could be both. It could be at different times you've experienced that. But think about that dynamic.
Do you see Jesus mostly as a historical figure, a great teacher, or as the Spirit of God that is available and the essence of whom is with us all the time?
And whether Jesus, for you, how important is it that Jesus is the only way versus your way versus, there's lots of ways. Talk about that maybe of where he fits in a pluralistic world.
Have a great time, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks.